But it's not just email that's causing problems, right? The number of weekly meetings has increased by 153%. People would like to turn down about a third of the meeting invitations that they receive, but due to organizational norms, they only turn down about 14% of the invitations that they receive. We've got to do something about this. So let's talk about how we can reduce inefficiency and rescue some time. In practice, this means that we need to stop throwing our attention around like it's loose change, and instead start investing it like it's a precious resource. What does this look like in practice? Well, I've got 4 top tips to enhance your communication efficiency based on 25 years of evidence that has been investigating how to improve the way that we use email. Feel free to take a picture of these slides. I'm also happy to share the slides if people would like them afterwards. The first is to reconsider. When did we decide to make email a kind of instant communication tool? It used to be asynchronous, but for some reason, there's this implicit expectation that we always respond rapidly. So reconsider that promise. And related to that, consider scheduling your email use. It doesn't necessarily have to be instant. Could you batch your email use to particular parts of the day? Some people I know only check their email and reply once a day. That might not be practical in your role. You might need to do it 3 times a day. Perhaps you need to do it 5 times a day. But I'd encourage you to have a system for reading and replying to email rather than letting it leak into every single moment. Thirdly, you're going to have to help people to understand that you're shifting away from using email like instant messenger. So set expectations. You could just have an email signature that explains when people can expect a reply from you. And finally, limit. Once you've put those principles into practice, switch off your notifications. When you're actually working on something, don't interrupt yourself. Who decided that notifications being on as the default option was a good idea anyway? Now, I encourage you to try this experiment, even for a few weeks. If it doesn't work for you, you can always go back to your previous way of working, but many people find it's incredibly beneficial for both reducing stress and improving productivity. And in fact, some data indicate this could save 180 hours per year per person. So reflect on that. What could you do with those 180 hours? I'm going to share some more ideas in this presentation, and it might be that some of that rescued time could be reinvested in some of the other ideas that we're going to explore. Also, though, I think many of us struggle with an overwhelming number of meetings. You might need to implement what I describe as a meeting purge to try and reduce the number of meetings that are hanging around in our calendar. The first step is to do what I'd call a meeting audit. Identify those meetings that are recurring, which are just there because they've always been there. Many of us have got some of those meetings in our calendar, and this audit can help you to figure out which ones those are. When you've identified those recurring meetings that are pretty low value, that you might be able to get rid of, cut the clutter. Just get rid of them. Try and get rid of them for 6 to 8 weeks. If you genuinely need them, you can always put them back in. Thirdly, scale back the rest. If you've got recurring meetings that are left, run an experiment. You might not be able to do this with every single meeting, but you could potentially move some weekly meetings to fortnightly, some fortnightly meetings to monthly. You've instantly cut down your meeting calendar, and again, if the frequency needs to increase again, you can always do that. But humor me, do an experiment for a few weeks and see what happens. And finally, when you followed these 3 steps, perhaps most importantly, slash the duration. Who decided that 60-minute meetings were a good idea? Cut your default 60-minute meetings to 45, maybe even down to 30, the 30-minute meetings to 15. You might have heard of something called Parkinson's law. Parkinson's law essentially describes that tasks generally expand to fill whatever time we give them. So if you cut your meeting down to 30 minutes, I guarantee you'll probably get everything done during that time. And if you follow these 4 simple principles, you're going to rescue some time. Time to reinvest, perhaps in productivity, maybe in your well-being too. You also need to look out, though, for a particularly pernicious type of worker who walks and even sits among us today. You may even be one. Are you a meeting maker? You might be sitting next to a meeting maker. When you gather data from workplace analytics software, it turns out that just 5% of people are responsible for about 60% of meetings. And these meeting makers don't just clog up our calendars. They're also the people who've got the worst meeting hygiene. No, this doesn't mean the people who've forgotten their deodorant. It means the people who are most likely to turn up late and let the meetings overrun. So if you know a meeting maker, I'm sure no one here is a meeting maker, I'd encourage you to share this simple framework with them. It's a series of questions that the meeting makers should ask themselves to figure out whether a meeting is truly required. The first question, have you thought it through? I'm not saying that we shouldn't use meetings to think things through, but very often people end up defaulting to a meeting when actually spending a little bit of time reflecting on their own probably could result in them coming up with the solution that they needed. If you have thought it through, you can move to the next step. Do you really need outside input to make some progress? Often, there's an internal document that they could reference. It might even be answered with a simple Google search. If they genuinely do need outside input, then move to the next step. Does it really require real-time interaction? This might be an appropriate opportunity to use a different communication tool. I don't want to advocate for clogging up your inbox, but how many meetings have we all been part of that could have been replaced with a single, well-worded email?